Give the floor, last but not least, to my dearest friend and great colleague, Ambassador Mohan, the distinguished PR of Sri Lanka. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will be quick. May I first of all congratulate you for convening this meeting on the theme Financing for Peace Building. The COVID-19 pandemic has had, as we know, severe repercussions on the global economy, highlighting the long-term concentration of extreme poverty, particularly in the conflict-affected areas. As the world recovers from the pandemic, it is perhaps more critical than ever to ensure predictable and sustained funding for peace. Mr. Chairman, on the 2nd of July 2020, Secretary General Guterres warned the Security Council that the COVID-19 pandemic is profoundly affecting peace and security across the globe, and that the health pandemic has fast become a protection crisis. The SGE said this due to the fact that the trust in public institutions is being eroded in places where people perceive that authorities have not addressed the pandemic effectively or have not been transparent about its impact, and the potential for instability and violence grows as grievances become more entrenched. One of the weaknesses of official aid for peace building is that it is dominated by only a handful of donors, as we see it. We have heard it this morning. In recent years, there have been no significant new donors. The international peace-building community has thus appears broadly reliant on a relatively small number of donors whose contribution have remained stable for at least the past 10 years. Sri Lanka, Mr. Chairman, has traveled far in the peace-building process, and we have cause for optimism. We have established an Office of National Unity and Reconciliation, which is backed by government finance and other donors. Sri Lanka appreciates the contribution made by the United Nations, more particularly through the Peacebuilding Support Office and the Peacebuilding Fund, to support Sri Lanka's journey towards sustainable peace and reconciliation. As we speak of strengthening financing for peace building, it is also important that the PBC and the PBF enhance their interactions with national governments, which are the beneficiaries of these resources, to better understand, I say, and assess the actual requirements in relation to the ground realities. In mutually agreed areas, inclusive consultations and interactions would ensure the effective use of these limited resources of both the United Nations and that of the stakeholders. I say there is an urgent need for great supervisory oversight in the appropriation of finances so as to ensure optimum benefits to the community concerned and not to individuals who are known to apply such resources for collateral purposes, inclusive of the prosecution of political agendas. As spoken earlier, in these deliberations, another resource we can look for, of course, for funding is philanthropy. Philanthropy, as we know, brings a clear comparative advantage and carries substantial support to peace building because of its flexibility, its ability to take risks, and its innovative nature, but also it can mobilize monies very quickly, as demonstrated in the COVID-19 crisis. Yet, its investment in peace building has so far been limited, unfortunately. Similarly, to peace building ODA, the philanthropic funding for peace building, is reliant on a small number of foundations, which also might also have to reduce funding. So while foundations are well aware of the changing geopolitics and the national politics, and some of them are more willing to fund more political and social movements, others, unfortunately, are less so. And there's a tendency to consider peace building as being too political. Moreover, the difficulty to measure impact on peace building pushes philanthropic donors to fund other areas in which it is easier to show results. Now, despite the fact that philanthropic giving is very much about values, notwithstanding the fact, COVID-19 has exacerbated factors influencing international support for peace building, including a more volatile geopolitical order and changes in domestic priorities in donor countries. Mr. Chairman, peace building and a conflict-sensitive approach have not yet been at the forefront, unfortunately, of the international response to COVID-19, undermining attempts to build back better. in a world where negative conflict dynamics are increasingly apparent. The pandemic, finally, with growing questions about racial justice and the decolonization of international relations and development, will also push the overall aid system to evolve. Peace building, as we all know, is a complex process, and that also requires flexibility, risk-taking, and a rapid different types of resources. This is where philanthropic funding brings a comparative advantage, in my view. It is support to peace building. Philanthropy is no doubt value-driven. Philanthropy has a long history of not only supporting implementations, but also advocacy work and more creative ways of influencing opinion formers and narratives, which is something we identified as essential to raise the profile of peace building. So, Mr. President, while foundations are well aware of the changing geopolitics and the national politics, and some of them are more willing, I say, to fund more political and social movements, others are less so. And there is a tendency to consider peace building as too political. Moreover, the difficulty to measure impact in peace building pushes philanthropic donors to fund other areas in which it is easier to show results. So making the case and building a political constituency, I say, for peace building is important. It would not only increase the resources. In conclusion, you can be assured that Sri Lanka would support peace building measures in its full measure. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Excellency, for this very rich input and comprehensive input. I give the floor now